So I took the starter to a shop locally that rebuilds starters and alternators, and he said there wasn't much he could do with it. That the nose where the mounting holes are is unavailable. In fact, he said the only parts he could get for it was a solenoid. So I did find on Amazon a aftermarket starter that looks very similar in configuration, but I'm just a little bit concerned about it not having the horsepower it needs to spin up at proper rate and all that. On the site, on the purchase site, it specifies all the models that starter is actually pertinent to, 911s in the 75, I think, to 79 range, and 914s, and also some VWs. I can't remember what kind, but so I may try that. That's like, I think it's $199 plus shipping and tax. So, and it takes a couple weeks to get. So I'm still inconclusive about that. What I may do, just for testing purposes, because that's about all it's going to be good for, is get on here and shave this down where I can get a flat washer on there to hold that thing in place fairly securely, just with a grinder, and that'd probably be okay for testing purposes. What I don't want to do is to strip out the flywheel. That would really suck. So I did drop the engine completely out of the engine compartment. I think today I'm going to pull the plugs again. I'm going to try turning the crank by hand. I think I can get a better sense of, how smooth the cylinder walls are just by turning it by hand. Maybe even take the alternator belt off. The alternator may be causing some friction, if it's dodgy. That kind of stuff. Definitely clean up the engine more, vacuum all the debris off of it, stuff like that. Inside of the engine compartment, this is pretty revealing. I'm not too unhappy with what's going on in here. The driver's side seems to be relatively corrosion-free regarding the suspension console and the trailing arms. They're not too bad. There's no giant rust holes in them or anything. Of course, the engine shelf has that corrosion there. That's very common. The good news is the seals are all on the engine shelf, which is unusual, except for passenger side is missing the seal. Passenger side is a little dodgy. It's got a good big corrosion hole there. We knew that. Where the gas lines went through that shelf, was a grommet in there that's corroded. A little bit concerned about this suspension console. Let me turn the flash on here. That appears to be a little deep. I'll need to get a wire brush in there. That's the motor mount, and then this piece here is called the suspension console. I actually replaced that on another 914 I purchased, and it was a major process. We have some corrosion underneath here. I have to take a look at that, but otherwise it's pretty solid up top. Got some good metal all around there. So anyway, that's where we're at inside of here. Another thing I'm going to try to do today is pull that circuit board out of there and check those connectors and do continuity on the circuits. I did get a couple of relays. However, the relays, I think they're related to the heater and the rear lights, maybe. I think I mentioned this in the last video. The hot wire for the starter from the ignition, the starter solenoid actually just doesn't go through a relay, it goes straight through that board on a trace. But if that board is toasty, it may not be passing that current, which I put the camera up here. It looks a lot better than most of them I've seen. So anyway, I can. This is a great opportunity to do that. You can buy those boards. They're a little pricey. I think they're around 250 bucks is the best price I've found for them. Or, you know, if not going to use a heater and whatever else it uses a relay, I guess you could potentially just splice those two harnesses together. I'd have to research that because I don't want to be doing anything unsafe. So that's where I'm at for now. I'll take a few more videos as I go along here today. It's not going to be super productive, but I want to try to get some things done. So shaved off, flattened off that area, put a washer behind that bolt. You saw me test firing that starter. Seems pretty strong on in the vise, but I don't know. Here's a note. That bolt goes right through the bell housing, so it's pretty easy to get out. Actually, I didn't realize that till I dropped the engine, but anyway, we're going to spin this thing again up. First thing I'm going to do is put a ratchet strap on it so it don't come flopping off this crate, and that would really suck. So with the starter somewhat rehabilitated, or just after the bench test, put it back on. You saw that, and I started going through and checking compression. Again, pulling the plugs out of the opposite bank, putting one plug in the bank that I'm testing. The first test, I think it was on cylinder 3, I actually came up with 70 psi. Subsequent cylinders were reading more like 60, but the battery was starting to drain down, even though I got a charger on it. And the starter, you know, started being more sluggish. So, you know, readings like that, it make me more hopeful that this doesn't have, the rings aren't completely shot in this engine. You know, of course, it could be valves as well. Valve adjustment may be a factor. Could look at that. It probably should be looked at. I'll need to get a gasket kit, because once you pull those covers, those gaskets underneath there are going to fall apart. So, you know, I'm not completely convinced that this engine needs to be torn down. Another thing I noted when I checked the oil, it's way over, and it's because of the mystery oil that I put in there. It's like, yeah, quart above what it should be. So still getting a lot of oil in the cylinders on when I pull the plugs out, but that, you know, could just be the overage getting into the cylinder walls. So I'm not thinking that's terrible at this point. So I think I'm gonna move on to that circuit board next and see if I can rehabilitate it. So here's that distribution board out of the car. It's still got a lot of that remnants from the fire extinguisher. I noted already that one section here is cracked, but the traces underneath don't appear to be burnt. And I'm a little hesitant to peel all that back. I guess I could and replace it with some other material. Okay, well, main thing is to get a circuit diagram and check continuity from pin to pin on, and I did get some some relays. So I can even check the heater and stuff like that. Stuff that I probably won't even use. But let me get it all cleaned up first, and then we'll start checking continuity. I got it cleaned up pretty good. So the pins on these connectors do not have numbers. So you have to look at the connector on the harness and cross-reference a number. I can tell you, and I tried to scrape it on here. That's pin 1 on that connector. And then on this one, which is the output, that's pin 1. And then it goes odds, evens, and odd, and even. So right there would be pin 2. Anyway, the most important thing is for the starter, pin 1 is a direct circuit to pin 6. And I do have continuity there. I checked a couple others like the tack, just the stuff that's important. There's one on the diagram I'm not sure about. It goes to this fuse right here. I believe it's a 15 amp. Something about starter power, but I don't know. It's not really clear exactly what it does. It may energize enable the relays on the heater and stuff like that. I mean, which I'm not really concerned with right now. I may go ahead and stick a fuse in there. The other one, I'm pretty confident I don't really need it at this time. Another important item is the voltage regulator, which is driven through this board, has been bypassed. So we can take a look at that. Bypass is not really the proper term. So it's a external, an aftermarket voltage regulator. And so that mates up with the harness on the engine. So that part of the board I don't really need to worry about, as long as it's routed correctly to the alternator. So I can double check that harness on the engine. The one thing that I'm pretty suspect on is that this is the output connector. It's got a pretty dodgy wire there. I'm going to open up that connector and see what pin that's related to. So again, you can see the yellow, which is the starter circuit, which I measured continuity from pin 6 on this. It goes up into this harness, this little harness, and comes out here. So that hooks up to your starter solenoid. And I did have continuity, so that wire from that connector up through that little harness is good. So starting to narrow it down. I'm going to try to get everything working on that board that I can that is related to starting the engine. I'd like to see the tack. The other stuff just doesn't really matter right now. So still moving forward. So the dodgy pin is pin 5. It was actually the tack. So I was able to snag a little bit of good wire on the pin and put a couple nice butt splices and some fresh wire in there. My soldering skills aren't the best. Just so you know, guys, these little caps, they just pop off. I'd go easy on them because they're brittle with age, but hopefully with that splice on there, I can still get the cap on. All right, I got the board back in there, and that one connector looks a lot better. I also got in there and cleaned up that ground. It's got about a half dozen grounds going in there. So maybe when I put the engine back in, I can get the starter to work off the key switch. I'm hopeful about that. And I'm going to wrap it up for today. Thanks a lot, guys.